You are listening to Within Tolerance, a podcast for machinists by a machinist. I'm your host, Dylan Jackson of Protean Machining, and this week I am happy to welcome Alex Van Dyck. Welcome, Alex.
Hi, Dylan. Good to be here.
So, for anybody who doesn't know who you are and what you do, what are all the details?
Yeah, so I am, at least on Instagram, one of two pages. My main page is Packible Tool, and that's kind of my full-time gig. And then I've been trying to lately do a better job of documenting some of the behind the scenes. And so you may also see me and start to know me in the behind the scenes space as Dark Sky Industries on Instagram. So those are my, pages. What we actually do at Packible Tool, I describe it as we make aftermarket accessories, modifications, and things that augment the function of modular tool storage systems, mainly focused on guys in trades-related industries, electricians, plumbers, thinking like those types of people, middle to high-end trade professionals. And mainly we are in and around the Milwaukee Tool Packout platform, if people are familiar with that. We do a lot of accessories, add-ons, and things that augment and add functionality to those particular boxes. That's kind of what Packible Tool is about. And the longer term vision, at least a little bit for the company, is to move continually in that space, but also into a little bit more of like a general shop organization, tool storage type area. Again, with focus on modularity. That's kind of how we build everything around it. So new stuff coming soon. Hopefully we'll be moving kind of parallel into that area a bit more. It's a bit more, how do I put it, mass consumer than the niche that we're in now. So it gives us a little bit more, durability as a company. But yeah, that's what we're about, and we're about to be about, I guess.
That's great. Yeah, it was actually funny. And as an aside about your Instagram, someone sent me one of your dark sky stories, and I didn't know it was you, but you had just been by the shop like a week or two beforehand. I was like, man, I know that voice. And then somebody's like, oh yeah, it's Alex. I was like, oh, okay. Yeah. This makes sense now.
Yep. Yes. I have been terrible about like the last couple of years as we've been getting started as a company. Just, the solopreneur world of you're so dang busy, you don't have time to turn the camera on and document stuff. But there's so much stuff that I've saved from the past couple of years that I have filmed, but never edited or put, in a public space. So I'm hoping to, as I get more time and more settled and the company matures, can start to document that a bit for whatever usefulness that might be for other people. Because I always feel like, at least as someone who's recently been through and is in the trenches of that journey, sometimes it's hard to look back at previous experiences and accurately describe what you were feeling like in the decision of those moments. And a lot of times I feel like you watch other people too that have documented their experiences or tried to give advice on what they did in those moments. And you look at it and you're like, are they for real? Like, it's not that simple. Like, because clearly this is stuff that was 2 or 3 years removed from where they currently are. So,
right.
Rose-colored glasses, whatever you want to say. It's, I'm trying to do a better job of documenting along the way and putting those things out there. So,
Oh, that's great. Yeah. I think, like you said, it's tough looking in retrospect because all of that stress and stuff, when you know the outcome of the end of it, it's like, it wasn't that bad. I was barely sleeping and up all night because I was a ball of stress, but it all worked out. But when you're in the trenches, it's very hard. So I totally understand that.
When you haven't worked a 90-hour week and are, at any point 6 days away from going bankrupt, it's like, okay, well, it's a little different now.
For sure. Yeah. Let's get into your backstory then. How did you get to start Packible? Where does this whole manufacturing journey start?
Well, if we're going to say manufacturing journey, I really got interested into it in high school. So I was lucky enough to be in a high school that had a pretty good tech ed program and one that was at the time developing. So in a lot of ways, we had a lot of this like STEM curriculum, and I think it was like possibly Project Lead the Way was the name of the organization. And it is a group of businesses, basically. I don't know how big they were, but at least in the Midwest here, that put together this curriculum, STEM related, to get people interested in engineering and manufacturing and all this other stuff. And so anyways, I was involved in that in high school, took every class that they had by pretty much the time I was a junior. And then what got me interested in machining actually was a local company donated a 1996 Haas VF2 or 3 it was. And it was an older machine, floppy disk drive, all the good stuff that comes with old machines. And no one knew how to run it at school. It was just sitting there. They also donated 2 licenses of MasterCAM. which were there for us to play with. And the school didn't really have any curriculum around it. So I just took 2 semesters of independent study, and my independent study was to figure out how to run that. So that's kind of where my machining journey started. And I was self-taught MasterCAM, self-taught how to use, I guess, kind of a Haas, but they're pretty approachable. If you're a smart guy, you can usually figure it out.
Totally.
And there's so many tutorials online and things you can Google. It's, So yeah, that's kind of where it started. And then I kind of got away from those roots for a little while because I went to college for mechanical engineering. And so I didn't really do too much with that manufacturing background. I loved manufacturing, but I was like, I'm going to go into engineering because that's kind of where I saw myself fitting in better, I guess. Funny story, it comes full circle. I got my first internship because of the MasterCAM experience that I had in high school. It was actually the reason that the company hired me, because they were looking for manufacturing engineering intern to do MasterCAM stuff there. Well, I'm self-taught. I had experience in high school, but I was like the only applicant they got that had MasterCAM experience on their resume. And I'm like, glad I stuck that on there.
Yeah, seriously.
So that got me my first internship. And for people that may or may not be uber familiar with the engineering space, a lot of mechanical engineers end up crossing over into manufacturing engineering. Half the people I worked with when I was in that space were all mechanical engineers. But so yeah, that kind of got me back to my manufacturing roots. And the company I worked for at the time had a ton of just really old equipment. Like we had some new stuff. We had 2 over $1 million, I think they were over 1,000 millimeter pallet horizontals, Mazaks dual pallet. We had 2 of those. So those were brand new, state of the art. Like that was a $2 million sitting in one room. And then you walk out of that room into the rest of the shop and it's all like old Kearney Trekker machines, which haven't been made for
a long
years,
time.
23 years. Like I was younger than most of the equipment in the shop. Let's put it that way at the time. And for context, I'm 26 now. At the time I was 22. So a lot of old stuff that is not nearly as approachable as the stuff is nowadays. So I look back on that time as I was frustrated when I worked there because nothing was digital. Nothing was approachable. You're talking old FANUC controllers. And we made compressor housings for these compressors for whatever. And so they're rather complicated parts to make. These programs in the horizontals, like if you printed them out, were 600 pages long in 12-point font. And every single one of them was handwritten, completely handwritten.
That's insane.
And the only one that really knew the full context of what was in those things was the guy that worked there for like 45 years. That was like, whilst I was there, simultaneously also being forced out to retire.
So oh my goodness.
It's one of those classic situations. Yeah, nothing was really well documented. It just functioned good enough that the company somehow got by, and it had been doing that for over 100 years. So it's like, okay, this is interesting, but it kind of forced me at a young age, rather than getting to rely on a lot of the technology that, you would typically have at your disposal, accurate CAD models, those types of things. I mean, there was stuff on the parts we were machining that wasn't on the prints or the solid models. So it's like, you kind of get thrown in the deep end and you learn how to sink or swim. You had to get familiar with some manual G code. We had MasterCAM. You couldn't really use it for certain things. And so that's where I kind of got my trial by fire in CNC and manufacturing. Was
how did they even buy these horizontals then if they were so stuck in the past? Were they being utilized really all that much? It feels like It would be tough to use them being that far stuck, in handwritten code or, all that stuff.
We literally took this old guy. His name was Paul. Everyone called him Peg Leg Paul because Paul literally had a peg leg. He was a character. Like if you picture like classic, probably like 1970s, 80s, like gangster with like the white button down shirt, gold chain and a cane. Like the guy was, if you saw him, and a hat, the signature black hat, you'd think the guy was a pimp. But anyways, he was a character, awesome guy, great mentor. But yes, what happened was, so we had all these frames we used to run these compressor housings on old Kearney Trekker machines. And so when we got new machines, because I was there when one of the new Mazaks was put in at this company, he literally sat down and converted the nuances, the differences in the G code, line by line. He knew what he had to look for. He used Notepad on his computer with the little search feature, and he'd go find the next thing, and he'd literally comb through the 600 pages by hand and change the little nuances, differences, the M codes, little differences between the controllers. And that's how they would go from one to the other. Because the G code was the same, the fixtures were the same, the parts were the same, but it just, you had to have the right code, obviously, for a Mazak control, but just bizarre.
That's bananas.
The guy had next level patience. Let's put it that way.
Well, not only that, but just the stress of like, I'm running now hand edited G code on $1 million machine. Especially I can understand maybe the second one. You're like, okay, I have a little bit of experience, but on the first one, there's no backup. This is it. That's insane.
Yep. And so that was part of the problem. And so they came to me then as I was coming on kind of full time, and they were like, okay, you need to shadow Paul and understand what Paul does, because we need you to be able to do that. I'm like, Paul's got 45 years of history doing this, and he knows where all the bodies are buried. I'm clueless. I said, if you expect me to do this, you better give me a solid model that I can mess with, because otherwise forget it. Like, the way that they programmed stuff back in the day with, 2D Autodesk drawings and handwriting cycles and stuff out, those guys were nuts. Just nuts.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, and we were a company that oftentimes got ourselves into hot water because we supported everything we ever made. And we had a 150-year history. And we had drawings that weren't in existence anywhere other than a file cabinet in a room upstairs in wooden drawers, where we would have to go pull that thing out and try to piece together the last time we made this 50 years ago so we could make one and sell it to a customer, and would spend like 2 or 3 days doing this and waste all kinds of money, but we'd support it for like ever. It's like, we need some obsolescence here, folks.
Yeah, or at least some digitalization. Talk about the liability. They
had a company come in and scan most of the drawings into the computer so you could look at a scan, but there was still stuff that was like, okay, well, if it was beyond 100 years old, we'll probably never need this. Joke's on you.
Boy.
So yeah, that's kind of where I started, and I was working for this company, and I guess where the story takes a turn to the crazy and how I ended up in Packible Tool was, at the time I was interested in 3D printing. I wanted to get into kind of, exploring other different technologies and manufacturing. Around this same time frame, 3 or 4 different major things happened in my life. I got an interview with SpaceX to be a manufacturing engineer, which was really wanted to work for SpaceX or just get into the aerospace industry in general. That's where I always wanted to land from the minute I stepped foot into becoming a mechanical engineer. I'm like, that's the coolest, highest level, if you want to learn the nuances of things, go find the most complicated thing that interests you and, dive in. So that's where I was hoping to land. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough experience yet a year out of college to close the deal on that. And so I started looking for opportunities to, figure out, okay, well, how can I get experience doing these things? Because I wasn't going to get it at the company I was at. So that was brewing in the background. I started a side hustle, which was Packible. I love tools. It's always just been kind of a side hobby for me. And I was like, man, it'd be cool if I just had this thing or that thing. And I just made things I thought would be useful. And so that was I was literally shipping orders initially out of the basement of my duplex. I had a Shapeoko router and a couple of Prusa printers, and that was the beginnings of the company. Back to the fond days of irritating my landlord with doing stuff in the basement, which he was always like cool with us doing stuff, but then the router pushed it maybe a little beyond.
So got you into that kind of tooling in the first place, though? Were you doing woodworking on the side? Because like you said, these are trade tools, so it's not the normal thing that a machinist or a manufacturing engineer might pick up. I mean, granted, I think most of the people that listen to this podcast have definitely seen it, if not own it. But so where did that come from? Where did this obsession with it come from? Yeah.
So I guess to backtrack, so I'm passionate about manufacturing. The environment that I was in was a union shop, and I got into some trouble with the union because I was simultaneously being pushed by the office side of people to do certain things while also trying to walk the line of not, peeving the guys off in the shop. And the guy that I ended up, I guess, crossing paths with wasn't even a guy that I'd ever talked to before. Just saw me do something and decided to go file a grievance. And I won't get too deep into that, but I sat in a room with HR at that company, surrounded by about 6 or 7 other people who were not on my side. Well, this guy berated my personal character, and I've never said 2 words to the dude. So there was some internal politics there that weren't great. I was also in a department of 5 when I started. I was offered a full-time position 6 months before I graduated. But shortly thereafter, the 2 senior engineers, one got forced out of retirement, so he was going to be gone in 6 months. The other took another position somewhere else. basically our department of, well, actually we were a department of 6, was down to me and one other guy. And he was in charge of assembly. I was the only one on the entire machining side. So there I was, like 22, 23 years old, managing multi-million-dollar daily operations, just keeping things afloat by myself for probably 2 or 3 months while they were looking for other people to bring on. And so with all these senior level positions that were open, I'm like, perfect opportunity for me to step up and, move into a role I might never have another opportunity, for 2 or 3 more years to fulfill. And they said I was too young, and that was basically their only reason, even though I was already doing the job competently for 3 or 4 months. So that was kind of the breaking point. I'd started looking for a job, preferably something that had like 5-axis and other multitasking machines, so I could get that experience to go to SpaceX. And that's when I decided, screw it, maybe I'll just try my side gig full time. What do I have to lose? I'm 22 years old, fresh out of college, broke. I don't have anything to lose. Like, if there's ever a better time in your life to try something, I'm like, I don't think there is, because once you're 30, 35, you've got kids and a family and all the rest of it. It's like, okay.
Right.
There's a lot
stakes
more.
are low then. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, totally.
So anyways, to come full circle to answer your question, how did I get passionate about, what I do? Never was necessarily 100% about the industry that I fell into, the niche that I fell into. I was passionate about manufacturing. I was passionate about entrepreneurship and business and all of these things. And I was like, working for the company, at least for me at the time, 22 years old, working for a corporation, I just got a bad taste for that. And I was like, I'm not going to get the experience and the opportunities that way, clearly, that I was hoping for. And maybe the experience would have been different somewhere else, but that's just where I was in my headspace at 22, having had that experience. And I'm like, I'm going to go do it for myself.
Totally, yeah.
I'm going to go get my own machines, my own equipment, my own stuff. And that's kind of where the vision panned out, was like, okay, now what can I do to pay for this? Because you can't just go buy at 22, you can't just go buy a $60,000 CNC machine and be like, yeah, I'm now going to take 2 years off and learn how to use this thing.
Right. Yeah.
Like, there has to be a reason or some kind of income to offset it. So that's kind of where the side hustle merged with the passion for learning manufacturing.
What was your first product then that you were selling?
First product that I was selling was rail-mounted accessory for the pack-out boxes that allowed you to wrap cords, extension cords on the side of the box. Because I was like, I guess to answer your question that you were asking earlier to a degree, I've always kind of been around trades my whole life. My family's not necessarily invested in them, but like in college, I did construction, like commercial framing for 2 years. I had family members that are plumbers and different things. And so I grew up around a family that was handy. I grew up around people that were like that. And so I always just kind of had an innate interest in, whenever the families would do remodels, we'd all go over to other people's houses and help. Like, I'm from the Midwest. Yeah. I'm in Wisconsin. Like, that's just what we do here. If you don't got a buddy that wears camo and knows how to do 6 different trades semi-professionally, you're probably a hobbit. Like,
right.
That's the Midwest. And so anyways, I guess I've always had an interest in tools. I've always liked Milwaukee tools. I've always liked those things. And so I was like, I've always owned a bunch of them and owned tools and these things. And I've done little bits of woodworking and projects. And it was always, the tools always came as a result of the projects or a passion for something else. It was a means to an end, a facilitator of, me accomplishing something. And so anyways, how did I guess, arrive at my first product? Well, I've kind of always had this talent for seeing things and being like, I guess, seeing things that maybe are inherently obvious. I don't know. But to some degree, looking at something and be like, this would be so much better if it had this, or I bet you people could really use one of these because I could see a struggle with this. And it doesn't necessarily that I'm using this stuff myself. I'm just able to, I guess, walk through it and say, okay, people carry extension cords, most job sites. You don't want to stick that inside of a watertight box. It doesn't need to be in there. It takes up a lot of space and it's going to get all tangled. So why not make a way to neatly organize it on the side of the box? And so that's kind of how it started. And then it's one product after the next. And once you kind of start down a path like that, people start to give you the ideas for you. I mean, I've got probably 70 plus ideas, 50, 60% of which are flushed out with sketches and probably 40% have CAD models. I just can't get to them all. But, on top of that, I probably another 30, 40 ideas that just come as customer submissions or other guys that are in the space that have done this for 40 years. And they come to me because I have a reputation for being a decent guy to work with. And they say, I've had this idea for this thing. I've been doing this for 40 years. I think this would be useful to other guys in my space. Can you help me make it? And so that's kind of now some of my products, actually probably about 50% of my portfolio is things that guys have come to me, said, hey, I got this idea. Can't make it. I don't have that skill set, but I think this would be great. What can you do? And I took it and my engineering background, polished the design, figured out how to make it something that could be mass consumer or, sold as a product to people that, seems professional and it's not like some guy made it in his basement sort of thing. And then figure out how to manufacture it at scale for a cost that's reasonable.
Totally. Yeah. So you said, made in your basement. How did you go from being in your basement then to where you are now? Where did that all shake out?
Yeah. So started in the basement, outgrew the basement pretty quick because as soon as you get a router, that was pushing the limits. So when I made the decision to quit my job, I moved everything back to my parents' place, actually. They had a pole barn, what we call them, but a nice steel building. So I moved everything in there and I started doing that full time. At the peak, I was big on 3D printing initially as the height of our manufacturing. And I didn't see that as a long-term solution because 3D printing is awesome. It's not designed to make parts that are going to withstand trades types environments on a long-term basis.
Right. Definitely not. Yeah.
Yeah. So then I was like, okay, well, we got to pivot eventually. Plus, the other problem with 3D printing was at the time, and I saw it early on. You make something, 6 weeks later, somebody else can have you knocked off, have the same exact thing to market, and be doing the same thing you are. There wasn't enough of a separation there that differentiated me from every other person. It was going to be very easy to get washed out. My ideas were good, but when you're trying to manage a portfolio of, let's say, even 10 ideas and keep up with that, it's easy for one other guy to take one of those ideas and literally only do that one thing and steal all your business from that one idea. So that's kind of what I was running into. So when I moved back home, I was like, okay, we need to move into metal because the way I looked at it is most people don't have the skill set to operate a CNC machine. You can start up a 3D printing thing over the weekend for $200 with a Creality printer off Amazon and a couple of YouTube tutorials. Like, okay, the barrier to entry for a CNC machine is $50,000, $60,000 experience, knowing what you're doing, thousands of dollars in tooling, all of this. Like, okay, I'm going to go for metal. So I started looking. This was late December 2019. Decided that I was going to buy a Haas mini mill. I guess I shouldn't say I started there. I was looking heavily at Tormax, almost bought one. In hindsight, so glad I did not. I would have outgrown it so fast. And having the tool changer and that sort of stuff for productivity's sake, just night and day difference. I probably wouldn't be as big as I am today if I had started there. It would have been slower. So I took basically all the money that I had at my disposal. I dumped it into a down payment on a Haas Mini Mill 2. And the reason for the Mini Mill was find me another machine of that caliber for around $50,000 that you can run on single phase power. I'll wait. But that's what I did. And that's what I had access to for power and resources and a roof over my head at the time at my parents' place. And so, yeah, still got the Mini Mill today. I'm sure we'll get into that, but that's how I started machining parts shortly thereafter. And that's still one of our primary production machines today. Went from my parents' shed in about a year's time, outgrew that. I literally had less than 6 feet of space in front of that machine. The room that I was in was about 15 by 15 feet for that machine. So it was cramped.
No joke.
But made it work. And it was just me and a lot of long hours in that little room. That, and then I did all my shipping and fulfillment, whatever, out of a spare closet in the basement, my parents' house. And yeah, I just got real humble, at 22, fresh out of college. You're like, finally, I'm going to make some adult money and, I'm going to be a baller, live a life, watching all my buddies buy nice pickup trucks and whatever a year out of school. And I moved back in with my parents and blah, blah, blah. So things kind of take a wild turn though, because I bought the machine, literally made the down payment. COVID happened end of January. I quit my job officially January 2020 and decided to go full-time on the business. And the world shut down basically February. I'm still here. Things actually went good. I think it was a blessing in some ways. People were stuck at home. They were forced to listen to me.
Right. Yeah. Well, and everybody was doing home renovations and all of that, if I'm stuck at home, I might as well buy some tools. And yeah, that probably worked out really well.
The trades world didn't shut down. I mean, plumbing still needed to be plumbed and electrical still needed to work. And, those guys didn't stop, which is kind of nice about, I guess, having a business in a foreign industry that is rather resilient. I mean, I tell people if the economy crashes tomorrow, trades guys are still going to be busy. There ain't enough of them to go around. They can't get to all the work they have now. They might just actually finally catch up on their to-do list. I mean,
right.
They're still going to be busy. They're
Yeah.
they're desperate for people. And so, yeah, I mean, that I moved from there to about 800 square foot shop, and I was there for about a year and 3-4 months. And then last July, we finally outgrew that. And so last July, we moved into the combination of kind of outgrowing that and then also wanting to add another machine that was rather large. We brought in a 5x10 CNC router, and that wasn't going to fit in the 800 square foot space. And so, yeah, then in July, we started moving into, and well, we're still moving into. It takes like a year to fully move into a space, I swear. But we moved out in July last year we're in about 3,000 square feet now. So we made a pretty big jump. We got about 2,000 square feet of shop space and another 1,000 square foot of, I'd say, like mixed use office / clean room for washing, packing, parts, shipping, blah, blah, blah.
That's great.
Yeah.
So, talk about your router. Why did you choose a router over another CNC mill? And, what did you buy it for?
Yeah. So a lot of the products we were making or moving into making were pieces that were larger and flat. So that's a good candidate for a router. And it was stuff that was a lot of stuff that could be nested out of sheet goods. We cut a lot of plastic, like HDPE plastic, 5x10, 4x8 sheets of that, anywhere from 1/4 inch to 3/4 for various things. So there's that aspect of it. I wanted to get into doing more products with thin aluminum, like 1/8 inch thickness aluminum. And the routers are awesome in that sense because I was buying a lot of sheet products in broken down format. Like I was having it sheared or cut or laser cut elsewhere. I'm like, it'd be nice if I could do this and bring it in house. And a lot of the things that I was having done on the outside was break it into smaller pieces and then put it in the Haas and then machine the edges. And I'm like, well, this is dumb. If I just had a 5x10 sheet of aluminum on a router, I could just machine the entire thing in one go. I don't have to pay for the laser cutting. I don't have to pay for the shearing. I don't have to pay for all of these things. And that, and looking at where my product catalog was heading long-term, I had a lot of, I kind of based the equipment I'm buying off of where the product ideas are headed and what I think I'm going to need to make those things. So that was the tool that I think we needed at the time to facilitate that. Routers are a funny thing though. It's, you start scaling everything up and it gets expensive fast. And it's very different space than CNC machining is, where it's enclosed and inside of a, thing with coolant. And we take for granted how much of a, leeway coolant really gets you when it comes to running tools. Figuring out how to run and cut aluminum, like we were cutting 50-52 sheets of 1/8 inch thick aluminum on that machine dry in single pass with single flute, O-flute style rotor bits. But that took 2 or 3 months to figure out the learning curve on that. I probably broke, 10-15 bits learning whether they plug up or overheat, or that $50-$60 a pop. You're like, every one is
Yeah. It's expensive lesson anytime you have to learn a lesson in machining.
Yes. And I beat my head against the wall for a couple months, which wasn't my fault to a degree because the company I bought it from didn't seal. So the way routers work is if you do routers, you often do vacuum work holding.
Right.
But it's not actually vacuum work holding. It's more like, I call it downdraft work holding, because you're not actually ever establishing a true vacuum.
Right. It's like mass flow,
yes,
where you can have holes, you can have voids and all of that.
Yes.
You're still okay.
You're basically removing more air than can get back in, and therefore you establish holding through some kind of a pseudo vacuum. But it's never where you actually reach a true vacuum. So there's a vacuum plenum that distributes the vacuum to the sheet goods. And then many people don't know this, but you put a sheet of MDF, like standard MDF you'd get from a home goods store, on top. You face off both sides, and the vacuum actually pulls through a piece of 3/4 inch MDF. It's wild. You wouldn't believe it unless you saw it in person. It's cool though. Problem was the underside of my router table. The router table itself is made out of MDF as well. They didn't seal it, so I was losing a bunch of vacuum through the underside of the table, unbeknownst to me. And so I'm sitting there losing parts left and right, frustrated as hell, calling the company. I'm like, why can I not get this to work? They're like, we don't know. Then one day I was underneath there trying to figure it out for myself, and I accidentally stuck something to the underside of my table, and it just hung there. And the light bulb went off in my head, and I'm like, I've got a 5x10 leak path on the underside of my router table.
Oh no. Oh, that's terrible.
Company had to fly a tech out from Minnesota. Well, they didn't fly him out. They sent him out in a pickup truck with replacement pieces for my top, and they spent like a day and a half there on site replacing the whole thing. I don't think they made any money on my machine. Let's put it that way.
What brand is it, and why'd you choose that one?
The brand is Shop Saber, and I bought them because they're, I guess, widely known for making they're kind of like I'd say like a Haas of the router world to a degree. They've got, just a good, solid machine for a reasonable price that has feature sets that you would probably otherwise pay a lot more money for elsewhere. Some of the major reasons I bought it, it's made in the USA, right in Minnesota, so it was close by. Wasn't a gazillion dollars in freight to get it here. The fact that they had the support available that they do, I try not to buy into environments or systems or companies that don't have the support structure to, when I call at 5:00 on a Friday night, I'm about to be down all weekend. What are you going to do for me?
Really?
And then the other thing was kind of the construction of the machine itself was well done. It has ball screws, literally has 10-foot ball screws on the y-axis. Every axis ball screw driven. So, most routers are rack and pinion.
Right.
And rack and pinion over time gets loose, sloppy. Just ball screws are way better. Fascinatingly enough, if people like machine stuff, the ball screws are actually stationary on this machine, and the nuts spin and drive the router.
Oh, how bizarre.
Yes, because when you have a 10-foot long ball screw hanging there, you can tension it all you want.
Right, it's going to whip though.
It's going to whip.
Yeah.
So they move the nut instead, and it's got like a belt drive around the nut that then has a motor and drives it back and forth. So it's very different departure from like what you would expect in a, like a standard CNC machine sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes sense. Like you said, like you can't spin a 10-foot ball screw, but at the same time, just the idea of a spinning ball nut is very strange.
It is. Yeah. Just because, we get so used to the CNC machining world of Haas's and, those type of machines. And then you step into the router world and things are kind of like upside down. It's like stepping into the upside down of Stranger Things. It's like, this should apply, but something about this is just a little off. Like,
right.
Yeah.
What controls on the machine?
It runs a controller called WinCNC. Actually, it's okay. It does what it's supposed to do. It works with Fusion pretty seamlessly. I didn't have to change anything about the post. So I guess I can't complain too much, but certain things that should be like for example, I like option stops. I put them in all kinds of programs. It's like, okay, what if I want to put an option stop here or a temporary stop to inspect a part or whatever? That's complicated to do. It's not like you just use an M0. They have like their own proprietary thing for that. And it's confusing and it's not actually an option stop and blah, blah, blah. So,
oh, weird.
It has some nuances to it about that I don't care for. And the interface is a little bit dated, but Shop Saber actually just bought Langmuir Systems like 6 months ago or less, and they have awesome touchscreen interfaces on most of their stuff that I've seen. One of my siblings owns one of their CNC torches, so I've seen that. I'm kind of hoping the two companies kind of get together and they take the awesome hardware from one and the software from the other, and like future machines, it'd be cool to see a little bit more modern interface in that regard. But
so far, it's not mock, that could have been really bad.
Yeah, no, it works. They support it. They know the ins and outs of it. And there hasn't been anything that I've wanted to do that I couldn't do up to this point. You just kind of have to learn the nuances of how that machine accomplishes that task. And it might be a little bit of a roundabout way of getting there, like anything, but you can still get there. So I guess that's all that's really important at the end of the day.
Totally. So you also have an employee. Talk to me about hiring your first employee. As a young business owner, I imagine that's kind of an interesting and hard thing to do.
Yeah. So I got lucky that I met somebody about my age, and he's still older than I am, but only by 2 years. So that helped. But actually the building that I was located in was one of these like manufacturing unit condo type things when I moved out of my parents' shed. And so we had all kinds of neighbors. It was like one of these complexes, similar to what you're in, Dylan, where you've got multiple, tenants and units.
Right.
So one of my neighbors, actually, his kid is the guy who works for me now. And he went to technical school for a he went to technical school for some kind of like modeling and prototype making. And so he kind of got like a small taste of 3D printing and casting and this, that, and the next thing. And so he kind of had like a varied background of different things. He was working at Best Buy part-time on holiday hours and whatever, was hating it. And his dad's like, if you need help, like you should meet my son. He would love to work in this type of an environment. And at the time, I was not necessarily convinced that I needed to hire somebody yet. I absolutely needed to in hindsight. It was absolutely. I don't know what I would do without him around today. But yeah, it was getting to the point where I was doing 8 hours of machining and then doing everything else that I also should have been doing all day, and was barely getting by with that amongst help from family and friends. So I knew I needed help. I just needed someone to put parts in the CNC machine. I mean, most of the stuff that I do, I'm making multiple of the same exact thing over and over and over again. So once it's established and it's working, I really just need someone to push cycle start. We joke in the shop. My employee's name's Nate, and Nate and I joke in the shop. He goes, "You need to insure my green button pushing finger, because if that gets injured, we're screwed."
That's awesome.
So yeah, he ended up coming on and was a great fit, and he's been with us now a year and a half. So that worked out really well. But yeah, it's definitely a struggle. I am trying to hire a second person right now, actually, to help with some of the social media, graphic design, and that sort of stuff, which has become, running an internet-based company, it becomes a burden rather fast as you start to grow that aspect of things. And I hate it. I suck at it. Not artistic in that sense at all. So I get by as best I can. I've made it this far, so I couldn't have done anything too bad. But yeah, trying to hire somebody in that space, just like an intern even. And I've had an application out with the local tech colleges for an intern position for better part of 2 months now, and I have one applicant.
Oh, wow.
That I'm not interested in.
Clearly, yeah.
So it's tough. And yeah, it's hard. And I guess I dealt with that when I go back to my work experience in the days I worked for a corporation out of college. I mean, people didn't want to let somebody of my age in a leadership role. And, in hindsight, I guess, as much as I thought it was wrong for HR to take that stance, I understand it to a degree. It was going to be an uphill battle for, getting 40, 50, 60-year-old people to, respect that you're competent and know what you're talking about at that age. And so when you work in an environment like that, where that's most of your coworkers, rightfully so, I understand where they're coming from, I guess, in hindsight, 4, 5, 6 years later, but it's definitely hasn't made life any easier. One of my 26-year-old kids going to interview a guy that's 40 and has 25 years of experience. And, then there's the aspect of, are they going to respect your take on things? Are they going to respect that you have, this vision and you want them to come along and help you execute on that vision? So yeah, I am not looking forward to the day that I actually have to bring another person on with, machining background, so to speak, because those people are few and far between at the moment, number one. And number two, if you want someone that's decent, they're going to have experience and they're going to be older than I am, most likely. So yeah, I guess definitely. I can't age fast enough in this particular situation.
So how has building processes been for you to make sure that Nate can succeed? Because, it's one thing to make stuff that you think is good enough, and then when you get back to like, oh, I forgot this and this and this, but you did the process. So how much did you have to learn to make sure that you can just dump stuff on him and let him run it, or are you doing the setups and then just letting him run it? How does that all work?
Mix of all of those things. It's been a struggle, and I won't say that we're good at it now yet, but we're working on it. And that's kind of been the focus of this year is, you can, when you're doing it all yourself, you can get by with a lot of bad habits. You can get by with a lot of, I know this one fixture, the fourth part over and the third row jiggles a little bit, and I got to stick a shim under there and make sure it's good. Like when you're the guy running the machine and you have that, kind of intuition that you get as a machinist with experience, you can get away with stuff like that. When you have someone who maybe doesn't have that same level of experience or knows what to look for with certain things like that, you got to make sure that, that stuff's buttoned up tight. And so that was definitely a struggle, moving from me running everything to now I got to hand this off to somebody else. And what I was willing to put up with and what your employee is willing to put up with and deal with and whatever are two different things. And the outcomes aren't the same at the end of the day. And so, yeah, a lot of fixtures got redone after Nate came on to make them more ergonomic, to make them more efficient, easier to operate, things like that. We're constantly iterating. One of my oldest products, it's called the Joey. It's a plate that goes on the front of the toolboxes. We're on like fixture number 5, I think, for that one since I started. It's been, the products evolved, the fixturing's evolved. Now we have it to a point where it's dialed. The part that we struggle the most with, most of the machining stuff is gotten to the point now where it's pretty dialed. Where we make mistakes is in setups. Nate handles most of the setups himself now because he's done it all enough that he just knows. But documentation is our number one weak point, I'd say, at the moment. And that's why it kind of became a focus for us this year, is because the bigger things grow, the less I'm able to run around like, the Roadrunner man from TV and keep it all together, putting duct tape on holes and blah, blah, blah. So it's like, This stuff has to get written down. It's got to get documented. It's got to find a home. So I ventured in February. We dropped a bunch of money and I had a software developer write custom ERP system, we'll call it. I hate that term. It so does not describe what it is, but I'd say it's closer to maybe an MRP system, manufacturing resource planning. It's basically, it's called ArcNet is what we dubbed it internally. And it literally has like a Noah's Ark symbol for its UI. And it stands for Alex's Repository of Knowledge. And
I love that.
It's a little inside joke, but basically it's set up by part number. It has very basic BOM interactions, so I can tie different part numbers to different things. So if I have a bunch of fasteners that go with a particular product, I can kind of build out BOMs of what goes where. And then it also has like different modules. So every part number, you can turn on all the modules or you can only turn on the ones you want. So like if you turn on the manufacturing module, that's probably the most in-depth and complicated module we have. But that's got spots for setup sheets, CNC programs, NC files, pictures of things. I mean, I could go on and on. And so that we literally just finally kind of got the development done with about a month ago. And now I need to start using it and putting stuff into it and seeing how it goes. And I'm sure we'll iterate on it 2 or 3 more times and change it as we actually start using it. But it's a pretty darn good, I guess, first go at it, I think.
So what made you develop a custom solution? Did you try a bunch of other ERPs and MRPs, or did you just go straight wanting your own solution?
So funny enough, me and software don't have a good relationship in the manufacturing space, and we go back a ways, because when I was at the company I worked for before I went on my own, one of my primary projects was digitizing and kind of trying to help bring the company into the modern ages of software. And the battle we fought was, where we were a large company, well, ERP systems are designed for accountants and beankeepers. Like they're very like high level management top down. They often don't facilitate well to guys like that are running shops with manufacturing floors. So there's kind of a divide there. And so we really needed something at the time that would work well on a shop floor just for documenting shop stuff. And so I got involved with a company out of Germany called Simco, and they make some actually really powerful software for that exact purpose, documenting basically shop floor activities. They're really good with machining stuff, but it's a very complicated piece of software. And if you're not
Is
a
that
larger
MDM from them?
Yes.
Yeah, I have used that a fair bit. I was just starting an implementation of that at my last job before I left.
Yes.
And it is not easy, like you said.
No, awesome software, awesome people. Once you put the work in, the end result's awesome. Like the user interface for like the guys on the floor, great. The burden of getting it set up how you want it to function and like all the background stuff and getting the information actually in there, like was a nightmare for the engineers. Like on our side, it was going to be hours and hours and hours of work. And like we bought that and I didn't know, no one knew any better. We got it in there and I'm like going to management telling them, guys, we're going to need probably somebody full-time for 2 years, just sitting here doing data entry, essentially, if you really want this to work. They didn't like that. They didn't like that answer. They're like, you can just do that a couple of weeks on the side and like slowly I'm like, that ain't good.
You're like, oh, so in 5 years, we'll be able to use this. Cool. Okay.
Yeah. But I guess having dealt with that experience, and I looked at literally everything at that time, because that was what I was supposed to be doing. So I looked at ProShop. I looked at all these systems, and they're just so complicated. And they become burdened with features that keep getting added, because you and I don't need the same feature set. And so they put 100 features in, you might use 25. I might use a different 25. Maybe we overlap on 5, but now I got 75 features I don't use and you got 75 you don't use. So it's that kind of, I wanted something that was extremely lean. It had no BS in it, very simple. Like I wanted it as dead simple as possible. So I literally, one day, it occurred to me I needed to do this. I'm sitting up till like 3 a.m. sketching out UI, UX templates of how I want this thing to look and like flowcharts of how I want all the things to work. And I think the guy that I got to code it for me thought I was nuts because I sent him all this stuff and I'm like, here's the software. It's on paper. Make it happen on the computer. And I ended up working with a pretty good guy who had 30, 40 years of experience in this space. So it worked out. Highly recommend if you're looking to do something like this. And this actually, the tip came from Jay Pearson at Pearson Work Holding. I just happened to be buying something from him one day and I saw his video about them having a custom ERP system or whatever. And I know, like NYCNC, John Saunders and those guys did it as well. And so it was also kind of looking at other people that are further along in their journeys in this space and being like, what are they doing? Oh, they're all building custom ERP systems. Why? Like, why? And I don't know if I ever really got a good answer to that question other than I kind of reflected on my own experiences and where we wanted the company to go and said, okay, yeah, we got to do this ourselves. But I just happened to be buying something and Jay picked up the phone the one day that I called to ask a question. And I was like, hey, Jay, totally out of the blue, can I ask you, like, what did you guys do to build your ERP system? We want to do something similar. And I didn't know if he was going to tell me to fly a kite or what. Like, I don't know the guy personally or anything, but he was super cool. Jay's awesome. And he was like, yeah, we hired somebody on the platform called Upwork, which I'd never heard of. It's like a more professional version of Fiverr.
Right.
He's like, you want a full stack developer? And he gave me some pointers and I'm like, off I went. And so, yeah, just that little tidbit was enough to point me in the direction and, put a bloodhound onto the scent. He'll find his way to whatever he's looking for. So that's where I landed, hired a guy on Upwork, laid out kind of what I wanted. And it literally only took him a month to write it. I mean, they can work about as fast as you want. And we developed.
Probably helped that you already had the whole thing outlined too. I don't think most people go to a developer and they're like, all right, so it's done. Just make it in the computer.
Yes. That my developer was like, that's why I said I think he thought I was crazy because I'm like, basically I have 100% of the skill set to make this thing except writing the code. And I'm like, and I almost looked at coding it myself. I have some background in coding. I mean, we all do, being machinists. We code at the end of the day, G code.
Right.
But in college, being a manufacturing engineer, we did cross over into kind of that computer science space and had to learn some coding. But I'm like, more and more as the business grows, I try not to do things myself that I can outsource to somebody else that's more competent than I am in a particular area, because I'll spend 6 months learning how to do this and I'll make a whole pile of mistakes doing it. It just adds so much burden to the cycle of how fast you get to the end result, which is something that works well.
Yeah, it's very rare that the opportunity cost outweighs all of that,
And I struggle with that, man, because I'm someone who's naturally curious and I would love to have learned how to code it and figure that all out and do that. But like the businessman side of me has to step in and say, like, this is not a wise business decision to, waste all of this time on this when you could be doing something else, like actually putting the data in the software and moving things along. So I struggle with that aspect of things a lot in throughout the journey of, I want to do this myself because I want to learn. That's the reason I started this in the beginning, was I wanted to have new experiences and learn. The more the business grows, it's kind of a blessing and a curse. The more the business grows, the less I get to learn and do hands-on, the more that gets outsourced. But it's a blessing in the sense that, the income grows, the business grows, you live to see another day and, achieving a level of success. But when you're someone like me who's nerdy and has, strong curiosity for things, the closer you get to the top, the less you're an expert at everything, and you're more of a jack of all trades. You're an inch deep and a mile wide instead of a mile deep and an inch wide. So
yeah, I think a lot of us can empathize with that, go on deep rabbit holes or want to, and you're like, no. I need to just focus on making parts or something.
Yep.
So just to give the listeners kind of a rough idea, to develop something like this, are we talking a Haas worth of money or?
That's a great question. Because that's one of my biggest concerns when I started is like, I want to do this. I know I need to do this, but I don't got 10, 20, 30,000 to throw at this thing right now. So the great thing about Upwork is you can kind of pay somebody hourly and you can take it as you go. So I spread it over a couple months. Like the guy could have had it done in a week, to be honest. He was good. He could have done, I couldn't afford to pay him everything, all the hours he was going to work in a single week. So we spread it out. And so that's kind of nice. Like it was over a couple of months. I think I, up to this point, have invested about $4,000 or $5,000 into doing this. And
that's not bad at all.
No. And so I was very particular about like, so when you put a job application on Upwork, you kind of post your job and people reply to it. I was very particular about looking for someone who actually took the time to dignify me with a response that wasn't generic, that, took 10 minutes to understand what the project was, what the kind of nuances of it were. And, here's how I would approach this. So I had a phone conversation with this guy, consultation, whatever you want to call it, free of charge. Loved his approach to this. We used a platform called bubble.io, and it's sort of like a way to fast track internal software programs because it's not so coding intensive. The downside is, like, if you ever wanted to get to a point where, let's say you want to release your software to somebody else and you say, oh, I think I got a good piece of software. I think Jay's talked about this in some of his videos where he's like, we might, sell our software or something like this. It's like, okay, then you have to go about it a little different way because you have to be able to have the infrastructure and the coding behind it a certain way that you can deploy it to other, users and all of that sort of stuff. I am in the business of selling parts to guys in the trades. I'm not in the software business because I had the same sort of idea. I'm like, well, if I'm going to invest all the money in this, maybe there's a business opportunity there to share this with other people that might want something similar. But then I was like, okay, no, I need to focus on getting it working for myself. And if that ever was really something I was serious about down the road, actually the guy that did the coding for me talked me out of that. He's like, a lot of people have that idea, doesn't pan out in reality nearly as easy as you think it does, and it's exorbitantly more expensive. He's like, you build it in a platform like Bubble, they host everything. I have a website URL. It's all in the cloud. They host all of your stuff. It's like a cheap monthly subscription, like $30-$40. You get all your cloud storage, all the security, all the blah, blah, blah. And the rate at which you can innovate and change things in that platform is so much faster. So you can build a piece of software like this that's rather, we've got a good amount of functionality built into it, and you can do it for $4,000 or $5,000 and in a very short window of time. Like I said, if you had the vision, you gave it to this guy, he could have done it in a week.
That's killer. That's really piece of advice, I think. And
so initially we were going to do like 3 different modules for it. And I also plan to add like a little bit of ERP functionality to it, like to issue POs and automatically order inventory and certain things like that, which we haven't got fully working yet. But it got to be too much to chew all at once. So it's like, okay, we got the most important aspect of it done first. We're going to get that fully flushed out. We're going to use it for a couple months. We're going to get some data into it, probably make some tweaks and adjustments. And once that's all working and we like how that is, okay, now can we add, issuing POs and other things like that? Because I'm trying to automate tasks that we do frequently. When you're in a business like I am and you have, we order 6x6x6 cardboard boxes once a week. Okay, I don't need to order them once a week. The lady that packages my stuff can, I'm out of these, type it in and it automatically sends a PO to Uline or whatever, and they send me the boxes the next day. Like, I don't need to do that every day.
Totally.
Stuff like that, where that's kind of the next iteration, is adding some time-saving smart features to it. So yeah, it's a great experience. I would just tell anyone that wants to do it, it's less expensive than you think. Find a good programmer. Upwork's awesome for that. There's a lot of qualified professionals out there. Don't be afraid to use a kind of a canned platform like we did with Bubble. Bubble's awesome now that we've been in it. It's simple enough that, like, if I want to make a minor tweak to how the interface works, I can go out there and it's all graphical. If you can use PowerPoint, you can kind of change the graphical interface. If I don't like how something looks or I want to update my logo, I don't got to hire the guy back to do that. I can just poke at it. And, he even showed me a couple tips and tricks. He's like, if you want to change this, he's like, I don't really need to do this for you. Just here's the buttons. Like, it's dummy simple if you play with it enough.
That's killer.
Yeah, highly recommend that. And, have a vision going in for what you want. You're going to spend a lot of money figuring out what you don't know if you don't think about it beforehand. And so I think that's part of why the budget for us was what it was, because I spent probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 20, 30 hours over several weeks just kind of thinking about how we were doing stuff manually in the shop and, like, how would I want this to display in the computer? How would I want the kind of flow of tabs and buttons and, the interface to work? The more information like that you can, I guess, have figured out before you go to a guy like that, the less it's going to cost you. I definitely learned some stuff along the way. Like, okay, what's a super time consuming interface to build? Well, drop downs were like, you ever see like tabs or drop downs where stuff like you drop down a tab and all the stuff pushes further down the screen. That's a whole lot of coding to do because it's all fully dynamic. If you have static tabs with static size windows and everything always fits inside the windows and you can just kind of pan through them like file folders, that's like half the amount of work. So you learn stuff like when you go through and start developing this from your guy, ask questions, be like, how long is that going to take you to do? That's complicated. Okay, well, I don't really care if I have tabs or drop downs, so I'm going to take the cheaper route. It does the same thing. Things like that you learn just kind of by doing it. You wouldn't know otherwise. But I just looked at it, okay, well, if this is going to get really expensive, let's find a way to do the same thing, get the same result, but I don't need you to stick a bunch of time and effort into fancy coding to make animations and stuff look sexy. Like,
right. Put the money towards actual functionality and not sexy software. I gotcha.
Correct. Yes. So that was our recent journey, and the beginning of the year was kind of starting that. And now the journey will be hopefully into sort of putting stuff in it, iterating, adding additional functionality. And I'm super excited about the potential it has to augment the functionality and the efficiency of our business.
Totally. Yeah, that's killer. How much input did you get from your employee to make sure he was happy working in that?
Not a lot. Kind of had he doesn't need a lot of information with setups. Our setups are pretty simple. They're designed to be that way from the beginning. But his biggest complaint was like, I don't have access to the information that you do sitting in the office with Fusion. And so basically I just distilled that into, okay, he needs a setup sheet. He needs to know what tools are in the machine, what all the offsets are. Ideally there will be something in there that tells you what all the replacement parts are for the fixture. So if a screw wears out or a Mighty Bite clamp breaks, you can go in the drawer and pick that out yourself. You don't need me to, help you with any of those things. If an insert breaks in a tool, he's more than capable of fixing that himself and touching the tool back off. But what insert, blah, 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 things like that. So there's definitely a physical aspect to the software as well, such that, we have inventory of these parts and components, but it's the information that we really were lacking on. So I think he'll be tickled pink just having access to all of that at his fingertips, where it's well laid out and labeled and documented. So he's not guessing. And he feels confident that when he puts all the stuff in and hits cycle start, that it's the right things in the machine. And like I said, to get back to kind of what started the point of this conversation, and I guess reason why we did this in the first place, is I want to pick up the pace. When I first started the company, I could do a new product every month or quicker. And our pace of innovation and putting out new products has slowed drastically as the company's gotten bigger, because you take on the burdens of all these other things. And it starts to get really slow, especially when you're doing all of these things manually. Like I said, when you're the roadrunner, walking around putting duct tape on everything all day, you don't have any time to focus on anything else, making content, new products, improving, blah, blah, blah. And so that's kind of the point of this, is to document stuff that I can empower my employees and other people that help to do stuff for themselves. They're not reliant on me to be there, so that I can free up my time to get back to those higher level business functions. What's the next product going to be? What's the next improvement going to be? Things like that. So I think he'll be tickled pink just to have all of the information there and to be empowered to do what he does daily without needing, me to be around to help with those things.
Totally. Yeah, that'll be fantastic. So you touched on, product development, but also let's talk a little bit about pricing products, because I imagine, especially as an add-on product to something that's not exactly cheap as it is.
Yep.
How do you go about pricing these products? I imagine that it's not just time plus materials, because there is a market that you have to kind of consider.
Yeah, it's a good point you bring up. A thread I want to pull on too in this topic. Correct me if I'm wrong, but like in a standard, I don't really operate a job shop, so I guess I'm not too in tune with this, but I think you do more job shop type work. You guys are probably like whatever it costs you to do a job plus what, 20-30% markup or something?
I don't know that I don't usually shoot for a specific markup on that. Like I've got markup in the quote for tooling and materials.
Right.
And then I've got a shop rate, but I'm not saying like I need to make 20% on this. But yeah.
Okay. Got it. So I have, I guess in a similar sense, I have a rule about I won't touch a product I can't make 50% margin on. And the reason for that is when you operate in a consumer product space, I'm getting into now kind of having distributors, for example, and you have to have room in there for you to make a buck and for them to make a buck. And so if you don't, or like we're moving into Amazon, if you don't have extra room in there, if you don't start at 50%, by the time you list something on Amazon, it's not worth doing. Because Amazon takes 15%, fulfillment costs, shipping costs, blah, blah, blah. Pretty soon you're down to making pennies on the dollar of what you could if you sold it yourself. So as a general rule, I don't do anything that's less than 50% margin per se. That being said, I could just take cost materials at a 50% margin and sell it. That's not necessarily always a good idea because sometimes the product might be too expensive at that price point. Could be perfectly viable product, but just isn't going to work at that price point. Other reasons might be the value that the person might get from that particular product might be disproportional to a 50% markup. You might make a widget for, let's use smartphones, for example, like Apple makes a smartphone. I'm sure Apple's probably making a smartphone for $100, $200 and they're selling it to us for $1,000. You're paying it to a degree in proportion to the value you get from a particular purchase. So I have certain products in my product line where it's like, yeah, I could sell that for, if it was just a 50% markup, maybe it'd be half what I'm selling it for now. But what is a customer willing to pay?
The market will bear much more than 50%. And it's not like 50% markup. A lot of your products are $20, $30.
Yep.
So when you're saying 50% markup, it sounds like a lot, but really it's not that much to pack and ship and manufacture a product.
Yeah. Some things there's not a lot of meat on the bones. Other things there's a lot. And so that's kind of the balancing act you have to make as kind of the leader of the ship, captain of the crew is, okay, some products are great to have in there as filler items. Maybe they're 30, 40% margin kind of products. Other products, I might make 70, 80%. Those things all balance out and kind of have an average blended margin of 50, 60% or something like that.
Right.
But as a general rule, I try not to take on too much stuff that, like I said, makes less than 50% margin just because it's too hard to do distribution. It's too hard to do Amazon. It's too hard to do Etsy even, where they're taking a cut and you have to factor that in. But when I sell direct on my website, it's a lot easier because I maintain 100% of the margin.
Totally.
So where do I go with that? It's easier to price stuff high and bring it down over time. It's harder to price stuff low and then start bringing it up because people get sensitive to price increases. That being said, I think it's been a little bit easier to justify price increases in the last couple of years as a business owner because materials and stuff have just gotten more expensive. And so people are already expecting prices to have gone up. That being said, in a lot of my products, stuff really didn't change too much throughout the pandemic. And actually now it's back to the same level as it was before the pandemic. And it's like, okay, I could keep charging what I was charging and people are paying it, which to me feels, I guess, personally just a little dishonest, or I split the difference and I, knock some money off the price. And so that's the hardest thing is separating yourself from like trying to be the honest, if you're the consumer, you want, the company you're buying from to be honest. Obviously they need to make a fair living, but you don't ever want to be getting screwed over. Like they're making 98% margin on some 2-cent widget they're making in China.
Right. Yeah.
And so like walking that line and trying to figure that out is hard. And you can't directly ask people. I've made this mistake. Like I have reasonable size following on Instagram. You can't just straight up ask people, what would you pay for this? Because there's a group of people that's going to tell you the absolute smallest price on planet Earth that they think is, doesn't make them look like a jack, what, because they don't want to pay, for it. And then you've got other people that'll give you a reasonable estimate, but they're never going to be customers of the product in the first place. So it's like trying to ask people what they're going to pay for something isn't great. So I don't know that I have a good straight up answer for you. It's trial and error and experience thing. It's kind of like you get a feel for it after a while. A lot of it comes with the starting point of what does it cost to make? What do I need to make to keep the business afloat? And then sort of what do I think the market's going to support for this? And I've kind of got an internal network of guys that are in the space that are good friends with that kind of help, I'll bounce ideas off. I'll be like, you guys think $70 for this is fair? They're like, yeah, I think I'd pay $70 for that. Otherwise, as somebody who's kind of a solopreneur and, management is a one-stop shop, your head's an echo chamber of ideas a lot of times.
Right.
So you got to have those guys you ask or talk to and you're like, okay, what do you think, Bob, about the price of this item? Too high? Okay, good. Because I was thinking the same thing, but I don't know. I've been talking to myself all day.
Totally, yeah. So Do you have an example of a product that you created, thought you priced well, and then ended up having to either change the price or pull because you ended up losing your shirt on it?
It's a good question. My pricing's definitely changed over time on certain products. And actually some of the price changing that I've done has been a reflection of how the product has matured. And, the first one I made looks rough in comparison to how the current day version of that thing looks. And so I'm like, well, I think I can charge a bit more for this now because it's more refined and polished and further along in kind of its life cycle development. It's like comparing a Model T to a modern day car. We're a little bit more polished and refined than we were back then. So I guess that's affected how I've changed prices over time to a degree, but I don't know if I have a good answer for that one, in the sense that most of the stuff that I've put out there has sold pretty good at the prices that I put it at, and I'm kind of guilty of underpricing stuff sometimes. I feel like, just because I feel like, honestly, I feel bad sometimes asking a certain price point for something. It's like, it's a hard battle to play as business owner and be like, well, what will the market support and what do I feel okay with? Because I've been on the other side of that, and I'm frequently am on the other side of that, where I'm like, this damn thing shouldn't cost $150 when you're probably making it for 20.
Right.
So I am probably guilty of underpricing, if anything, and then trying to slowly and honestly creep things up to where they should be over time. But yeah, I've never had an instance necessarily where I've severely over or underpriced something and it's affected how it's sold or whatever. So
that's good. No, that's great. Let's see. We got some questions from the audience. Both Tux Garage and Wannabe Machinist asked, what is your favorite tool, favorite product?
Good question. Favorite tool, favorite product. Well, I wonder if they're asking favorite product that I make or favorite product like just in general.
Well, let's do both then.
Oh, okay. Favorite product that I make is probably our Joey plate that goes on the front I talked about earlier. It's our most refined, furthest along product, and I think it reflects best on the brand and the company the level of quality in product and in design and refinement that we strive for now in all of the stuff that we do, which is another thing that gets harder as you go on to maintain, because when you start out, you have a small platform of products, you iterate and you get better, but people then find you further along 3 years down the road with these mature products that have been refined and are well done, and they expect that out of you when you release something new. And it's harder to do that product development that you did previously publicly, because that's how small company starts out. You're publicly developing the product. You have no choice but to put the most bare bones version of that thing out there that you have, because you need to make money to stay alive, to make the next iteration. So it gets progressively better, but you sort of lose that degree of freedom to a bit once you start to become a bit more mature as a company and people expect the 3-year refined level of quality. And so kind of my hack around that is I've got a good group of people that do testing for me that's private and are friends of mine. And so I send them products before they hit market. And I say, okay, these are guys that actually use the stuff, that are electricians and plumbers, friends that I've made through the internet and Instagram. And I said, okay, beat this thing up for the next 3 months and tell me what you hate or love about it. So you kind of got to do that a bit more privately as well. The other reason is because the bigger you get, the bigger the target on your back is for copying things. I think it was you and I were talking about that briefly in Instagram chat the other day about people knocking stuff off. And it's, the bigger you get, the more people know about you, and the harder it is to publicly put ideas out there and get feedback, because, like I said, if I have a whole portfolio of projects and a business that's running, it's hard to keep all of that going and do product development. But if you're just some guy that's like, I like that idea, he hasn't fully pulled it off yet, I'm going to steal that. That's the only thing I have to focus on. I'm going to get it to market before he does and undercut his price point and blah, 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 blah. So it gets harder and harder to do that development publicly.
Totally.
But yeah, total side from favorite product. But
well, and then what about favorite tool?
Well, favorite product that I use, though, probably it's a love-hate relationship, but it's probably one of the most used things. I'd say Fusion 360, which is a controversial answer probably for some. But yeah, it's probably my favorite tool, because I don't think what I do today would be possible without that particular technology. Just like I go back and look at getting started, if you had to afford MasterCAM and a license to SolidWorks, I'd have been sunk before I ever started. Like the ability to have the power that Fusion has in a product for the price point that they offer it at, all of its quirks and negatives aside, which get frustrating on certain days. It's, find me something else at that price point that does what it does. It's enabled, I think, a lot of businesses to exist in this space that otherwise might not have.
Totally, yeah.
So, and that's also...
speaking of that, PSA, spurred on by you, if you don't have cloud libraries enabled on Fusion, do it now. Put all your tools in the cloud and let the cloud do its work.
Yes, I will. For context, for those that don't know or didn't follow me on Instagram, I had a tech support person from Fusion 360 log into my computer. They were supposed to be fixing Fusion because it wouldn't launch, and he wiped out all of the folders where Fusion normally stores its data. It's not part of the manual uninstall process typically. I lost the folder that had my tool library in it. And then I found out after the fact that they've had cloud libraries for a while. It's been a thing for a minute.
Yeah.
But you have to go turn it on in the settings.
Yes,
and so
you do.
If you didn't know about it, it's not that hard to... I'm justifying why I was being dumb now, but it's not that hard to not know that it's there.
Yes.
So, but yes.
Put your posts in the cloud, put your tools in the cloud. It is the safest place for them. Have a backup of them for sure, but put them in the cloud libraries. That's the best.
PSA, put it in the cloud libraries. I second that. If you haven't done that, do it before you go to bed tonight or whenever you listen to this podcast.
Yes.
Favorite tool. I think I kind of answered that with Fusion. I know the one guy asked, what tool do I use the most? That's probably also Fusion.
What about your own tools? What do you use any of yours a bunch?
Not as much as I'd like, to be honest, Dylan, because I've been doing way too much other higher level business function type stuff. But my favorite tool currently will do that. Is I bought a bamboo printer, an X1 Carbon, maybe a month ago now it was. That thing's awesome. If you like 3D printing, that thing's next level. That's the future of printing right now. That the thing, I've had as many as almost 20 Prusas at one time, and I still have 8 or 10 Prusas. That thing will outprint 2 or 3 Prusas, depending on what material you're running. And the thing is just insane. The level, talk about a product that should be given endless awards. That thing is just nuts. How fast they went from not being a printer company to how refined that thing is just spanks the socks off of what Prusa's managed to do in the 10-some years that Prusa's have been around. It's
amazing. Yeah,
it's an amazing piece of technology.
Yeah, and right over my shoulder, I'll talk about it more in what did you research this week, but there's a Hydra mod for the AMS unit. So you replace the whole bottom tray of it with a 3D printed tray. And it allows you to fit wider spools. And that's either tonight or tomorrow's project, is taking apart my AMS and putting that back in. Because it doesn't affect it. If you have to send it in for service or whatever, you can just put the old tray back in. But, PETG rolls from certain companies don't fit in the AMS and stuff like that. So I'm excited for that.
Cool.
Yeah. Great. Well, let's get on to shop news and new things. You mentioned your MRP. Anything else new in your world?
So the ERP thing is really the newest. The router is relatively new for us as well. We've had that, technically since last July, but by the time we were moving in parallel about the same time that it showed up. So, I really didn't get to start playing with it necessarily for a couple of months by the time it was installed and all that jazz. And then all the issues that I had with it, with the vacuum table, etc. So that's relatively new for us. We're kind of just finally starting to get that to the point that it's a productive piece of equipment. As far as new things in the shop go, a couple months ago bought myself a project. I bought an old AEM deburring machine it's like an old time saver. It's probably the more synonymous name with what that thing is. But if you're familiar with what nylon impregnated brushes are, what Brush Research Manufacturing makes with their NAM power brushes for putting surface finishes on in a machine, it basically has a 27-inch version of that inside of it that spins. And
that's nuts.
That's how it does the deburring. It originally was supposed to work with Scotch-Brite pads, because it's more of a surface conditioning machine. But yeah, somebody retrofitted it with that type of a brush, which should work great for what we're doing. But I got it for less than like $1,000. It needs some work and a coat of paint. But my buddy is also a mechanical engineer, and he ended up landing in kind of the industrial controls and automation space to a degree. And so he's pretty good at picking that type of stuff apart. I look at a control cabinet and my head spins. He looks at it, he knows where to stick things. So he came over and we got the fancy little invisible electrons flowing where they're supposed to, and every motor and thing on it works. So I basically got a working machine for less than $1,000, and those things typically are worth $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 used at least.
Totally.
So I'm excited about that. It needs some new bearings in a couple spots and minor maintenance things you'd expect from a 20-plus-year-old piece of equipment. But yeah, it was a good find. It was 20 minutes from my shop locally. So that's new. I haven't had any time really to play with it. It needs a VFD and a couple other things, but it's going to be stick a few $1,000s into refurbishing it, and it should be a great thing. We process a lot of flat plates coming off the router, and to deburr those currently, we're putting them through a vibratory tumbler. Mr. Deburr from CM Topline, pretty common. That takes a long time. It's, we might put pieces in there and it runs for 15, 20 minutes. And so it's slow.
Slow, loud, and yeah.
Don't get me wrong. Vibratory tumblers are freaking awesome for finishing parts, but smaller parts that are more prismatic plate style stuff, it'll do it. It's a bottleneck though for us. We've been getting by, but hope to bring that online in the next couple months. And I should be able to plop plates down on the end of it, flip them over, run them back through, and in 30 seconds have, finished pieces that then I don't have days worth of tumbling to do, because that damn thing runs probably countless hours in our shop on a daily.
I'm sure.
Just things always on. And you're right, they're loud and obnoxious, but
yeah, got to do what you got to do.
Got to do what you got to do. Yeah, so that's pretty much it for new /shop things. I mean, we're looking at hopefully adding another CNC machine soon, but I'm stuck on this debate right now between whether to add a second shift and another employee or another piece of equipment, because technically the piece of equipment I have has another 16 hours of capacity in a day. It's not being used, but it's a matter of whether or not you can find somebody you trust to be there, alone for 8 hours at night running that piece of equipment, versus the debate of having a second piece of equipment, which probably costs about the same monthly payment as what an employee would, and then having employee during the day with the help of some automation run both pieces of equipment.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know what the better answer is, but
that's tough. That's really tough. I definitely don't know the right answer for that either.
I don't think anybody does. If everyone had the right answers to all of these questions, there'd be a lot more rich business people in the world. It wouldn't be this hard, let's put it that way.
Yeah, we'd be making a lot more things in the US too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, that brings me to the last two questions I ask every guest every week, which is, first, what did you research this week? So it doesn't need to be machining related. It's just always interesting to hear what interesting people are researching.
Yeah. I'll do two for you. How's that? I'll do a personal and a business.
Okay.
Business, totally bizarre topic, but I've been researching parts washing, because we make a ton of aluminum parts, and getting a large number of parts consistently clean on a long-term basis is far more complicated than anyone would probably initially think on the surface. Like, it's
a massive pain in the ass.
It is.
Like, I don't even make a ton of parts. I make a few parts, and it's still a giant pain in the ass.
Yep. So, for example, for an idea of scale, in the last year and a half, the mounts that we make that adapt our products to the rails on the Milwaukee toolboxes, we've made approximately 30,000 of those pieces in the last year and a half. Every one of them has 3 tapped holes on it. And so you can do the math out on how many tapped holes we're dealing with, like 90,000 some tapped holes in a year and a half. That's sort of the scale of that particular component. So then they get tumbled after the fact because they're made from extrusion. And what ends up happening is the extrusion, as the media breaks down, it leaves and deposits stuff inside the threads in other places. And so then trying to get those clean, we don't necessarily have like specifications like it's some medical device has to be this clean, but to even get it just consistently visually clean is a challenge. And I've gone through, I was actually going to make a video on this. I didn't get that far yet. all different kinds of cleaners from all different companies. We've tried ultrasonic, we've tried hand washing, we've tried so many different things. We've settled on right now, we're using Simple Green's aerospace product, which as long as you use it within the given parameters is excellent. I was like,
works really well.
It works awesome. It's not cheap, but it's well worth every penny. So we've been using that in an ultrasonic cleaner. We were getting it too hot and mixing it in too high of a concentration for a little while that it'll actually corrode or anodize parts at higher temperature.
Burn parts.
Yeah. It's crazy. So yeah, we settled on that and that's finally working well. Any parts that we just wash in the CNC machine that just got coolant on it, honestly, like professional strength Dawn and an ultrasonic machine, like don't overcomplicate it. That literally works awesome. The problem is some of the stuff that we make, trying to fixture it so it'll actually sit in the ultrasonic machine properly. That's been a whole nother nightmare because you use the wrong kind of material for your fixture or whatever, and then it leaves white marks on your part where it makes contact. And I have this one thing I can't figure out right now. But I've been researching because if you wash one plate, it comes out fine. If you wash 6 all right next to each other, they, for some reason, end up with like, I thought there was stray electricity in our tank. That's what I thought it was, but I can't trace it down for what the life of me is. But you can wash one and it's perfectly fine. You wash 6 of them right next to each other in the fixture, and then they've got problems. So,
how weird.
It's just bizarre. Like trying to figure out, it's just trial and error. I mean, that's what it's been for us, but I've been doing a lot of research over the last couple months on chemistries and cleaners and trying different things. Like, why is one work and one not? Well, come to find out when you tumble stuff, that plastic media that breaks down, and I'm not going to say it and I'm going to butcher this, but there's a thing in there that's designed when the plastic media breaks down from a tumbler to kind of collect and wash out. There's some element to that, but it gets stuck to the surface of the parts. And so if you wash it in Dawn, it doesn't come off because the like ionic attraction between the particles and the part surface don't get broken. And so you can literally wash a part till it looks clean, and you can take your thumb with a wet cloth and you can smudge the surface like there's a black soot on it. And so you have to have cleaners I've found with phosphates in it, which is the thing that breaks down that bond and allows that to be released and come off. And so actually that Simple Green product has a lot of phosphates in it. I also tried a lot of Alkanox products, and many of them didn't work or work well because they weren't based on having phosphates in the cleaner. Tend to be harsher, harder to dispose of, etc., but they work awesome. So I like phosphates.
I don't know if you've tried it, but I've seen a few people. I think Pat at Old Boys was the first one I saw, but he bought a commercial dishwasher.
Yep, I have one.
Craigslist. Oh, okay, you do?
Yep, I have one. Most of our processes, I wash in the ultrasonic, and then it goes in the dishwasher just for a hot water rinse. And then I bought a sanitizing version, which goes up to 180 degrees with the booster pump. So the parts like essentially flash dry when you pull them out because they're so hot. So yeah. I was on that one. When I saw Pat post about that a while back, I was like, yeah, I'm not the only one using dishwashers.
Yeah, that's something, as soon as we move and have in-suite water, that's something I want, because I think that'll take care of 90% of our cleaning pretty easily.
Outside of the point, if I could ask you a question, how's the move going? Did you find a place yet?
No.
Not yet? Okay.
No, I was just speaking. I had Chris on. It'll come out, I think, today or tomorrow. We had 3 potential places, and when we got back from Germany, all 3 were under contract.
Oh gosh!
It's like, cool, okay, and like they wasn't like, one of them was not quite under contract, but the competing bid was a commercial company that had a 10-year potential lease with a full build out. I'm like, well, I can't compete with that. You know, I'm not going to sign a 10-year lease for a space. That's just not going to happen. So
right, because I know when I visited, you were talking about your struggles, so obviously no progress since. So
no, I look every day and hope and pray that I'll find something, but nothing yet. Something will come up. It has to. So
it becomes a part-time hobby looking for new spaces.
Definitely.
But yeah, the personal thing I researched, and leaving next Tuesday, I've been researching Hawaii because I'm going down to Hawaii just for a friend of mine that I actually met through the business. That we've kind of done business stuff together now and products together. We've gotten to be really good friends. And he's from Wisconsin and he's moving back here soon. And so I'm like, I should probably take up the standing offer that I have to go stay with him in Hawaii for a week and not drop 5-6 grand on hotels. So
yeah, that's a really good idea. Which island?
He is in the military, so he is on the main island in Oahu.
Okay,
right in Honolulu. So I'm going to just spend 5 days there exploring that kind of island, because the more I researched it, the more I found out that you kind of need, like, if you really want to see an island, you need 4 or 5 days, like on each of the main islands, to kind of really see them. And I almost went for like 14 days, but I do not like being away from the business for more than 7 days. It's kind of become a hard and fast rule of mine. Like if I take a trip, it's 7 days, I got to be back, because anything more than that, it gets real hard to start and stop.
Yeah. Both Brad and I were feeling we were feeling so motivated coming back from Germany and seeing all this amazing manufacturing. And then we got back and the actual work was it was a grind for the first week and a half.
Yep. And then you're putting up with all the stuff that you didn't do for a week and a half because things keep happening. And yeah, especially when you have a web-based business, the orders don't stop. Like I don't shut the website off when I go on vacation for a week. So it's been getting better in that essence as I have more people helping me and more employees, because that, I can leave for a week and things still happen. But yeah, otherwise it used to be if I was gone for a week, nothing happened for a week. So
right.
you were trying to get ahead up until the point that you left, and then trying to play catch up when you got back. And so you're basically just taking that week's worth of work and preloading it and post-loading it before and after. And so you weren't really taking a vacation because you're just so freaking exhausted.
Right. Yeah. You're just splitting up the stress around the vacation for sure.
Yes. Been researching all of that and new Speedios, because they dropped new machines. So I've had to.
They sure did.
I have to get a brother in my shop sometime soon. That's the next machine I think is going to be a brother, but.
Ooh, yeah. Well, now they have the horizontal as well. And
that's when I was eyeballing pretty hard.
It seems like such a bizarre release, but I'm anxious to see what they look like in the person.
Yes, that'll be the kicker. And I'm lucky that I live in the Midwest and Brothers US headquarters are in Chicago, so it's only like a 3-hour drive. So as soon as they have one, I'm sure I'll be able to go see it. But till then, I'm sure it'll be a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
Keep saving.
Yeah. Well, the last question I ask is, what are the things that you're working on to be a better person, leader, what have you? None of us are perfect people, and we all are working on stuff. So what are you working on lately?
Great question. I think for myself, I've found over the last couple of years that the business is often very much a reflection of what's going on in my personal life, and how well the business does or grows or whatever element you want to say is often reflected by what's going on in my personal life. And that's how it is when you run a company that's this size and you're so involved in the day-to-day operations. If I'm happy and everything's good in my personal life, things are cooking at the business, man. If you got personal stuff going on, oftentimes it's really hard to be like, okay, I'm depressed this week. I don't feel like doing this, blah, 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 blah. So for me, it's been trying to find the right balance between, because they often are competing for your sanity, in my opinion. Your personal life's competing for some portion of your sanity, and so is your business. And they're both such big elements of your life, especially at the stage of you've invested the time and effort, and, the business becomes like a child. So I guess things that I've been trying to do better at myself personally to be better at work is take better care of myself, make time for things I know I should be doing, like going to the gym a couple times a week, taking care of your mental health and whatever aspect that looks like for you as an individual, things like that. I mean, we take it for granted, but I went through, kind of in year 2 of the business, I was kind of on like a 3-month cycle of burning out where I would work an insane number of hours to the point that it's just depressing. You get unmotivated. You're like, why am I doing this? And that comes full circle then. And, it would end up resulting, for me at least, in the stress and the bad choices and lifestyle that you were doing would come full circle, and I'd end up getting sick. And then I'd end up being at home for a week recovering. And that was kind of like the reset button for, okay, now I took a week off, I guess, but now I lost the whole week. So, you factor in the week you lost because you did all this dumb stuff to put in all these hours. And now what'd you really gain? Well, not a lot. And you put yourself through hell. So, trying to do a better job at being consistent a flatline heartbeat of I struggle with this, and that's what I'm trying to get better at, is just kind of being consistent, because I'll go 90 hours and then I'll still, to a degree, burn out the next week and won't be nearly as productive.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
And to a degree, that's kind of how I am as a person somewhat. I work in kind of seasons of, 1 week I'll just be in the mood and have the brain power to, like when that software thing came to fruition, I literally did nothing else but was obsessed with that for a week. And then it just died off. And like, it was a struggle then to actually get it across the finish line working with the guy, because I'm like, now I've lost interest. Like my brain solves a problem and it's on to the next thing. And I don't want to putz with that thing no more. So
I can hard empathize with that.
Yeah.
I do the exact same thing where it's like, okay, I've done enough. I've learned what I want to learn. This no longer brings me joy. What's next?
And then it's the burden of actually taking that, and it's the 10% that it takes to get over the finish line that actually delivers the results and the value. So you can go 99% of the way there. If you don't actually finish the thing that it's to the point that it's useful, then what was the point?
Exactly.
But it's that last 10% that's just hell. So yeah, I mean, personally, I try to find outlets for, my mental health, outlets to have, I'm trying to do better at it this year, social outlets. It's so easy to get sucked into just work. You don't see your family, you don't go out with friends. It becomes an obsession. And to a degree, and this is what I was talking about when we first started, the show. If at this point, 3 years in, I'd tell people, well, you should have a better balance. But I don't think I would have been here if I didn't, go through that period of time and learn those things for myself, but also put that, grind in. So it's, it's funny, you look at people that are sitting at the top, like, yeah, it's easy to get my 1 hour workout in every morning and I never miss. And I'm like, if I had $1 million in functioning businesses, I wouldn't miss either.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, but yeah, it's just getting better at it's so easy to focus on the end result and not the process for me. And, keep staring up at the horizon when you should really just be looking at where you're going to put your next footstep in front of you. And so it's that kind of pervasive mindset that I'm trying to get more into in 2023 here, is, looking 2 feet in front of me instead of 2 miles, because while the 2 miles matters to a degree, you need to have the general correct direction you're heading. That's not the focus of your day. The difference is made in the 2 steps you take in front of you every day.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. If you trip and fall, you're not going to make it 2 miles. So you got to make sure you keep putting your foot right. Yeah.
You trip over the boulder that's 2 inches in front of you while you're staring at the, yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that. I think that's something we can all work on, and I appreciate you sharing it.
Yeah. No, great. That's what I'm working on.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Alex. I really appreciate you sharing everything and coming on the show. It's been fantastic to hear more about the background of your company and who you are. And one more time, where can people find you online?
Yeah, people can find me online at Packible Tool with an I, and at Dark Sky Industries on Instagram, to hopefully follow more of my behind the scenes here coming up. But thank you so much for having me, Dylan. It's an honor to be on this program. I know I've gotten so much value from listening to the other guests that you've had on over the course of this, and listening while I'm in the shop. So hopefully I feel underwhelming with the caliber of certain guests that you've had on here, but hopefully something I had to say helps somebody out down the road. No,
you had a fantastic story, and I think some really, really good nuggets of information there. So I appreciate you taking the time. Thank you so much. Thanks to all the Patreon members. New shout out for John. Thank you all for listening, and I will be back next week.